I'm Beth, president of GPWomen. Before we begin, I just wanted to make a few announcements. First of all, as you can see on the screen, GPWomen and PCCW have several upcoming events this semester, and we would love to see you all there. Please make sure you join our listserv to stay up to date. Later today, the details for the PCCW annual Graduate Student Power Lunch will be going out. It is coming up in about 2 weeks, Saturday, March 4th at 12 p.m. There'll be a panel of PCCW members answering a lot of questions and talking about their life experiences in, I believe it's technology, medicine, and business. Also for today's event, during the Q&A portion of the program, a representative will be giving you a microphone. We're recording these events for a video library, and it would be really helpful if you could utilize it. And also, hopefully you were given an evaluation form when you swiped your card at the entrance. These are really valuable for us to get feedback on how you felt about today's program, to solicit recommendations for future topics for the speaker series, and generally to let your voice be heard about what we can do to provide better personal and professional development for all of you. Speaking of today, thank you very much for attending this collaboration between the Graduate and Professional Women's Network and the President's Council of Cornell Women in conjunction with Women in Public Policy and the Graduate School. We are very pleased to present Having It All, Work-Life Balance, and How to Strategize for Success with Beth Livingston. Dr. Livingston is an assistant professor in human resources at Cornell University. She received her PhD in 2009 from the University of Florida with an MBA and 2 bachelor's degrees from the University of Kentucky. Professor Livingston currently teaches undergraduate and graduate level courses on staffing and human resources management and on managing work and family. Her research interests lie primarily in gender, discrimination, and work-family, with additional interests in diversity and stereotypes. Dr. Livingston has published in numerous distinguished journals, including the Journal of Applied Psychology, Journal of Management, and the Handbook of Organizational Behavior. Her research has also been featured in news outlets like the Washington Post and the New York Times, and she has been interviewed on NPR, the NBC Nightly News, and the Fox News Channel. Her own journey managing work and family includes a husband, a 5-year-old daughter, and multiple fur babies. Please join me in welcoming Beth with a round of applause.
Hi, everybody. Can you guys hear me okay? We good back there? Awesome. So thank you, Beth. Great name, by the way. For the introduction. It is always, I don't think it will ever cease to be awkward to hear your bio being told right in front of your face. But lesson learned, always take pride in everything that you've accomplished up to this point. So, celebrate your small successes and your large successes. That's a good graduate student. I teach our graduate student professional development seminar, and that's one thing that I always tell them is celebrate every single milestone, how small, because we don't get enough successes in this career. So make sure you celebrate everything that you can about yourself and about your friends and colleagues. So issues of gender and work family, as Beth mentioned, are my areas of expertise. And I was really excited to get an opportunity to do this. I have been associating with PCCW for a while now. A number of years ago, I received one of their junior faculty research grants to work on some issues regarding work and family, and it's really been a great opportunity. I think they're really out there wanting to help young women here in the Cornell community and beyond, which I think is really, really great. So today, I was thinking about what I wanted to present, and a while ago, I had been working with eCornell and talking about, I just knocked that over, sorry about that, and talking about what it was I thought was most important about work-family balance. This is something that I hear constantly, right? How do I become balanced? I want work-family balance, 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 balance. And it's something that people as a work-family expert always ask me, how do I get this elusive balance? How do I achieve it? And so today we are going to talk about it, and we're going to demystify it a little bit, and hopefully we can have this be a really nice interactive session. So I'm going to start by going through a few slides and talking about these constructs a little bit, but anywhere throughout, periodically, we'll do this. Periodically throughout, I'm going to stop, and we'll have a little bit of back and forth Q&A, because the back half of the session is something that I can kind of work around time-wise, depending on how we are in terms of conversation and the sorts of things and directions that you would like this session to go, and how you think it would be most helpful. So the first question that I want to address here is the idea of whether it's work, family, or work life, right? And I'm sure you've heard both of these terms used all the time. Do I get work-life balance, work-family balance? What does this mean? Genuinely, what we have found is that, there are two major domains. Work is really a major central domain, particularly here in the United States and the Western countries, which has really elevated outside paid work to the kind of Protestant work ethic ideal. And life is really, even though work is life for a lot of us, life is really encompassing everything outside of that paid work role. Family is one specific domain within the life domain, because within this we have people talking about work, school, or for those who hold jobs and go to classes. You have work leisure, right, for the leisure type of activities. And work family, and family being another humongous component of most people's lives. And the reason that you hear a lot of folks talking about work family is because, particularly in the West, although in differing degrees, there are a lot of cultural differences in the way that we talk about these things, family is really pitched as almost diametrically opposed to work in terms of the values it encompasses, the time that you spend, and those sorts of things. So it tends to be the lens through which I look at this, particularly also because I'm interested in issues of gender. And when you talk about work and you talk about women, inevitably someone brings up the family question, which is she married? Is she going to get married? Is she going to have children? Does she have them already? How is that going to affect how she works? All of that is encompassed with that word family, which is very, very loaded. So you might hear me, and the reason I bring this as my very first slide is you might hear me use work life and work family interchangeably. Please understand that what I'm really talking about is the comparison of this work domain to those things outside of work that also matter to you. It can be a nuclear family. It can be, I laughed. I gave a presentation a number of years ago, actually about 5.5 years ago, and I was visibly pregnant, plus my mother-in-law just moved in with us, and I was talking about being a part of the sandwich generation, right? Like, although my sandwich was not baked yet, it was getting towards the sandwich generation. But those are the sort of things your family can include: nieces and nephews you might care for, other family members, friends, roommates, like I said, my fur babies, right? All of those sorts of things. And in fact, Cornell, it's interesting, is often on the forefront of that in offering kind of pet policies. I don't know if you've noticed the pet benefits. There's pet insurance that are offered for employees here and everything else, because there's such a big culture of fur babies being a very central part of the work-family balance here at Cornell. So interesting facts. So when we hear the word work-family balance, I'm not a huge definitions person in that I don't often make my students memorize them, but in certain cases I think they're really important because they can help us all be on the same page. This is one of those times. What I like, so this is Joe Grivash and Gretchen Carlson, so this is, that's a news person, but these folks, Dawn Carlson is her name. These folks came up with this idea of work-family balance and tried to put a definition on it because it was being used in the lay literature all the time, work-family balance. And in academia, we like to measure things. It's very difficult to measure something without a definition, right? What are you actually looking for? If you're not in social science, right, these kind of things are probably just part and parcel with each other. If you're measuring something, you're measuring weight or you're measuring volume, right? Those things are defined. In social science, we have to put these definitions on them to decide how we're going to measure these things. And they become even more important, right? So work-family balance, the accomplishment of role-related expectations that are negotiated and shared between an individual and his or her role-related partners in the work and family domains. The reason I like to put this up is to show you how complicated, even in the definition, achieving work-family balance actually is. Right? It is not work-family balance. you feel like you're good at both of these things now, right? When you go out and you ask people what does it mean to be balanced, you get a whole lot of different answers. It's very idiosyncratic, right? And the reason is because there are role-related expectations. And first of all, the role changes, right? What role are we talking about? Wife, for me, wife, mother, professor, what, mentor, researcher. All those roles differ, and they have expectations that are related to them, and those expectations can change, right? Professor means something different if I'm at a liberal arts school versus I'm at an R1 school, right? Those things differ. Those differ if I have teenagers versus a toddler, right? Those role-related expectations change. They're not static. The next component of that are negotiated and shared. This is not something that you make up on your own, because there are other people in your life that help you to define what those expectations are and what does accomplishment mean in those expectations, right? How many of you have known people and you look and they seem very happy in their life and you look and you're like, there's no way I would be happy in the way that they've balanced their life, right? Idiosyncratic, right? And the work and family domains. This complicates it even more because your role-related expectations and the people, the partners you share this with, differ at work. They can be your lab partners, your advisors, your students, the students you advise when you graduate, right? Those are the people who have expectations of you and what those roles mean. And when you step out, it can be your partner, family members, right? Parents, children. What are their expectations of you? Like my daughter, her favorite thing to do is to come up and just slam my computer down when I'm sitting on there because she doesn't always like when I'm on it. And those are her expectations. That's not what mommies do. Mommies play Barbies with me all day long and watch My Little Pony. They did not do work. Okay. She learned though. But again, those are the negotiated things. And so we negotiate and we talk about those things. Okay, well, mommy will work for 30 minutes. We'll put the timer on and then mommy will play with you, right? We negotiate those expectations. And I think it's important to understand how difficult. Now, this came after years. So I'm friends with Dawn, and this came after years of trying to figure out how to define this, right? And it is still being negotiated and redefined because balance is tough, right? It's not just tough to achieve. It's tough to define. It's tough to measure. And some of the reasons it's tough to measure is because, again, when you're talking about these role-related accomplishments, what do you mean? Are you talking about time? If I asked you if you had balance, how many of you, if you were balanced, how many of you would raise your hand? A couple of you, a handful, right? Is it because of time? Do you not feel like your time is balanced? Maybe it's your involvement. You feel more involved in one of the roles you don't want to be. It's not primary to you, but you feel like you have to be more involved in it. Or is it satisfaction with the roles? What is it that makes you feel balanced? A lot of people run to the time thing, right? I need to feel like I'm spending equal time. But is that really it? Right? Is equal time really what would make you feel balanced? Again, this is what makes it so difficult. For some of you, it's very much time. I had a colleague in graduate school, and his wife was a nurse, and he would drop her off. Her shift started at 7:30, and he would drop her off at 7:30 in the morning, and he would come into work, graduate student, as was I, and he would stay there until she ended at 3:30, right? So he would work from 7:30 to 3:30 every day. He never brought anything home. Never. Never worked. Never did anything from home, which, as a person who always works from home, was baffling to me. But he would come in, and he would go in his office, he would shut the door. And he had that door shut for 8 hours. And he would get up and leave and not take anything home. And that was who he was. He segmented. And that felt balanced to him. I am 100, unless it was an emergency, his wife never called him. He did nothing family related when he was at work. And you didn't bother him unless you had something incredibly important related to the actual project you were working on to do. He was incredibly prolific with this method. It worked for him. If I did that, I would lose my mind. Because we're different, the way we think about these things, right? Is balance really the absence of conflict, right? So it's not just the amount of time you spend in, it's that you feel like these roles are in conflict with one another. What you want from one prevents you from having what you want in the other. Or the time you're spending in one prevents you from spending time doing something in the other. When we talk about conflict, we talk about things like, my daughter has karate class and I want to go see it, but I have to do a presentation or teach a class, right? Those things are in conflict with one another. They can't really be worked out. Or I've been asked to do something, for PTA and I can't because of, right? Those sort of things, those time-related conflicts. Is it balance the absence of conflict? Or can we be balanced and have conflict? What are our expectations? Is balance the presence of what we call facilitation? Meaning what I do at work helps me be better at home, right? So how many times maybe you've had a really, really good day at work, everything worked out in the lab, all your data worked out, everything was great. Maybe. Right? Everything worked out and you come home and it's like the sun is shining all day, you just want to break out in song, and that filters over and, spills over into family and everything goes great at home. Or maybe it's vice versa, right? Things are, going great. I had this happen many times before. My daughter wakes up, she gets dressed. She does everything I ask her to do. It's shocking. She gets in the car. Everything works out great. And I am walking in the office with a big smile on my face, and everything goes really, really well for at least a while. That's facilitation. Maybe sometimes it's the skills you're learning at home. Maybe you're really not, if you think about all the skills it takes to do this sort of academic sort of job. Maybe, for instance, maybe I'm not a very good negotiator, or maybe I'm not a very good nurturer, right? Or I'm not a good lead. What are these things that I feel like I'm very good at? And I hone those skills at work, and they help me negotiate at home. Or they help me be more empathetic. Maybe being more empathetic to my child helps me be more empathetic to my students, right? All these sort of things. I would find that often. I can't even keep count. I have lots of nieces and nephews. And step nieces and nephews. And almost all of them are teenagers or early 20s. So they're all in this kind of similar age group. And so I always laughed when I would teach my students because I felt like that was a very facilitating motion because they would call me up, Aunt Beth, and we would talk about their problems. And I felt like I understood them, my own students, better, because here I have these relationships with other 19 and 20-year-olds who, I'm not rolling my eyes at their antics. I'm really empathetic to them because I love these 19 and 20-year-olds. It helps me, right, to be much more sympathetic to the other 19 and 20-year-olds that are sitting in front of me in class. That's what we call facilitation. The other thing that can complicate this idea of work-family balance is what direction we're talking at. You notice that I was talking in many different directions. I was saying, is my work helping my family? Or my family helping my work, right? Or vice versa, is my work interfering with my family? My family interfering with my work? All of these sort of concepts can help us understand it. And in fact, what we've seen research do is primarily concentrate on issues of work-family conflict or work-family facilitation from either of these directions. And almost across the board have avoided balance because it's so hard to measure. We don't really know what it is, right? And one of the reasons, the practical reasons that in applied psychology we avoided this is because it's really a problematic metaphor in many ways. And I actually tried to avoid it. And one reason I kind of put the balance in quotes when I presented today was not just because I think sometimes it's elusive, right? And can you actually achieve it? But because I don't know necessarily if balance is a very helpful way to think about these sort of things. And I think if we can change the metaphors that we use, they can help us to understand and value our own lives a little bit better. So one of the things that I talk about when I talk to executives, and I'm in the ILR school and in HR, in human resources, and we do a lot of networking with human resource leaders, the chief human resource officers, VPs, that sort of stuff. And one of the things that I almost always talk about when I'm in these cocktail hours with these executives is about this metaphor of balance. How are you talking about this stuff with your employees? What are you signaling to them about their lives? And that's one of the reasons I have problems with balance is because first, the idea of balance is a state, right? If something is in balance, so you think of scales, right? They're in balance with one another. It is a state to achieve, right? It doesn't talk about a process. It's something to achieve. So if you're not in balance, you're doing it wrong, right? If you don't feel balanced, you're imbalanced, right? This is something I'm doing wrong. And I think that's not necessarily because it's elusive, right? And if you have achieved, maybe you're balanced for just a second and then you're not balanced anymore. does that mean that you failed, right? How we talk about this sort of stuff matters. And I think the idea of balance being elusive is one of the reasons that we have so many people who feel guilty about this idea of work and family. Because we're like, work family balance, it's something there, I should be able to achieve it. I've achieved all these other things in my life. Why can't I achieve this wonderful balance? Because maybe it doesn't exist, right? Maybe it's different for everybody. Maybe it's something you define differently based on the day that you live in. So there are a couple tips here that I give about thinking about balance. The first is, when I'm talking to execs, is change the metaphor. So instead of talking about balance, talk about things like management, which implies that this is a constant process. You're always managing your work in your life. Or maybe it's integration. You want people to be able to integrate what they value at work and what they value with their life. But regardless of what metaphor or what sort of process or what sort of descriptor you use, I always encourage them to be a process-related descriptor. Because it helps us to not feel bad that we didn't achieve it, right? You're never integrated or managed, right? What does that mean? It's always used, or most often used anyway, as a process, something you're doing. You're integrating, you're managing, right? This is something that you can do. The second thing is if you are really wedded to this idea of balance, it's something that really resonates with you, is try to expand the time, the temporal nature of what you're thinking about balance. So instead of thinking about am I balanced today, expand your time horizon. Because we all know that there are going to be weeks where it's awful, sometimes months, right? Think about your time horizon. Am I balanced this week? Am I balanced this month, this semester, this year, right? Think about what that means, change your time horizon. Because then you feel less guilty if you have a really, really rough week and you're not able to get to the gym or do whatever your hobbies are that make you happy, or maybe, you're ordering out for your kids every day, right? Whatever it is that you feel like you're not doing everything that you should be able to be doing, you feel a little less guilty if you're like, well, yeah, this is just a bad week, but on the whole of the month, things were pretty good, right? So change your time horizon if you can't change your metaphor. And I think those are very, very important things that we can do to start to change this conversation. Because one thing that I found in my research to be one of the most motivational, and I've learned this as a mother too, one of the most motivational emotions that there is guilt. And people feel pretty much about everything, actually. Guilty about work, guilty about family, you're not doing this well enough. And it almost always, at least from my experience in my research, stems from this idea of not meeting this expectation related to this role, right? And the idea, and I believe, you remember that article, that Can We Have It All, that whole conversation, Can We Have It All, right? Which I believe was really a fallacious way to talk about this sort of stuff. Because it, again, envisions this as something you can achieve. It's a state. One day I'll be perfectly balanced and I will stand there all day. That's not life, right? That's not living. These things change. But if that's what you envision as something to achieve, particularly, we find this amongst very well-educated, goal-oriented people who then say, I'm going to set balance as another goal on the top of my stick. Yeah, it's going to be problematic for you to achieve that. Now this idea of balance, I'm going to do one more slide and then we're going to break for some questions. This idea of work and family and balance is really gendered, right? So work and family and balance in general is something that men and women across the board both experience. And my research has found that men feel just as guilty about not achieving these norms and expectations as women do, right? They are not immune from this. Men and women both are feeling this guilt. The difference is that the expectations for men and women tend to be different. And we need to understand and acknowledge those things because they tend to constrain both men and women in very, very, interesting and not useful ways of what we care about as people's overall kind of self-well-being and the well-being of the organization they're working for, which in my work are the two things that I tend to do. And so I give an example here. How many of you all have heard of a woman named Marissa Mayer? Anybody? Right? Marissa Mayer, CEO of Yahoo, right? When she was hired, she was proclaimed to be the most powerful pregnant woman in the world, which much to her own chagrin. She's like, really? I'm the most powerful pregnant woman in the world? Okay. Right? Because she was pregnant when she was given the job. This was, wow, you're pregnant on the CEO job. Which she said, don't worry, shareholders of Yahoo, this will not interfere with my work at all. Right? I will set a nursery up exactly adjacent to my office. I will work the day after I come back. You know, and all the other pregnant women in the world went, oh man, that's the expectation, right? But again, women, CEOs, particularly in tech, are few and far between. So what was she supposed to do? There are expectations about what it means to be a CEO in tech, right? But there are also expectations about what it means to be a mother. And what we find is that often these gendered expectations are in conflict with work expectations, particularly concerning family. Now, one of the first things Marissa Mayer did when she came into office, so to speak, was she got rid of the telecommuting at Yahoo. A lot of employees at Yahoo telecommuted, they worked from home. And she got rid of it, and she said, well, when I worked at Google, we all congregated around the virtual water cooler, and this is how we became creative, and we innovated, and all of those sorts of things. And so this is what we're going to do. Now, the one thing that she didn't say was, we need to cut and fire a lot of people, and people might leave if we do this, so it's a nice, easy way to get people. I just didn't mention that part, but that's the HR, right? But people did not really talk about that part I just talked about, which is what is this really going to do to the bottom line, all of that. You know what they talked about? How could a mother do that to other mothers? Interesting conversation. And in fact, what's really fascinating is one of my colleagues in the HR department is an expert on like virtual learning. And we were both contacted to talk on NPR and different radio stations about this issue. And if the angle was women, I was called. And if the angle was telecommuting, he was called, right? It's the exact same story, exact same ramifications, but that tells you the way these things were talked about. At that exact same time, Barbara Jolie became the CEO of Best Buy. Best Buy had an incredibly popular and well-known process called the Results Only Work Environment, ROWE, R-O-W-E. And it was very, very popular. And what it meant was we don't care where you work, or how you work, or what you do, so long as you produce the results that we care about. It should seem somewhat familiar to many graduate students, which is, I don't care what you do, just give me what I ask you today, right? There were researchers whose job was, sociologists, and Erin Kelly was one of them, and some others, whose job it was to study this, and they were having all of this amazing research coming out to show that productivity was about the same, but people were less stressed, predominantly women were less stressed, right? So all in all, it didn't seem to hurt, it seemed to help, right? First thing CEO Jolie did when he walked in was got rid of the results in the work environment. And there was like no conversation about it whatsoever. Both tech companies or tech retail type of companies, although Best Buy, of course, was a little more retail tech in many ways, didn't really give many good reasons to talk, basically the same sort of reasons, which is we need all hands on deck, right? Never all these wonderful things. It's all hands on deck, everybody here, we need to be innovative, all of those things that you hear. And it was never talked about how could he do that to the working woman, right? Because he wasn't a pregnant woman, right? That sort of juxtaposition is how gender factors into this. The expectations, the way in which we analyze the reasoning behind people's decisions, right? I tend to be somewhat protective, I think, of Marissa Mayer just because as a gender researcher, I'm like, this is like unprecedented water she's in, right? You know, and they tend to give CEOships to women only when companies are failing, and then they tend, once the ship gets righted, they give it back to a man. There's all these wonderful management sort of trends that tend to happen, and so I've always been kind of secretly like, come on, please succeed, right? But the gender component of this, juxtaposed with the work family, is something that can't be ignored, right? Both of them got rid of basically telecommuting, working off-site, and the way in which these things were talked about. His was talked about, okay, the effect on the bottom line. And hers was not only that discussion, in fact, that discussion was really put on the back burner, and it was really talked about, well, what does this signal to other women, right? Other moms in particular. And those are the expectations that are constantly, and plus, And don't get me started with all the other layers of like privilege and stuff on top of that, because she can have an office right next to hers with a full-time nanny where her baby's right there, right? That's a whole other story. However, just the presentation of this on a gender scale is something that's very, very fascinating. Some companies, like Deloitte and Ernst & Young, have tried to do this in different ways. So Deloitte tends to do a kind of what we call menu of different policies where you can put together what you think works best for you. It's supposed to be agendered or degendered. Whether that's actually possible is something that is difficult to talk about. But what it often does is get at folks who you might be 23, 24, coming right into Deloitte, and you don't have kids, and you're not married, and that's not something you're thinking about. And so you don't need paid family leave and all this stuff right now, but you can create a benefit package that serves you at that time, right? What's difficult to really fathom is the degree to which adding those in later can stigmatize later on, right? Ernst & Young had a very different experience. Years ago, they realized they were having a turnover problem. So Ernst & Young being one of the many, accounting, big consulting firms, a lot of travel, right? Folks traveling constantly for client work. And they hired someone from Catalyst, Catalyst is a firm that consults on women's issues, and ended up hiring her full-time, giving her a job as technically a vice president sort of position, where she reported directly to the CEO, and she had all the control to change all of these sort of things. And changed a lot of the culture at Ernst & Young, and began this whole process of consulting firms saying, oh, maybe we don't have to be satisfied with like 25% turnover. Maybe we can do something about that, right? Maybe it's not just burnout. Maybe we can do something about that. Maybe we can say, okay, this 3, 4, 5 type of attitude where, we say no one's ever gone for more than 5 days at a time. You get 3 days home, 4 days right off site. All of these sorts of patterns, again, to allow people to have some sort of expectation. But one of the things that they found, and this seems fascinating, is that a lot of the work-family problems that people had and the things that were keeping these folks from feeling imbalanced, and mostly women in these cases, were that their bosses knew nothing about their lives and were really scared to ask about it because they didn't want to come across as being intrusive, which obviously is a problem. But there's, for instance, a story about a woman who had a 2-hour commute every day, and they had a 7 a.m. meeting every day because it was international. The time difference. It is 7 a.m. meeting, and she had a 2-hour commute, right? Which means she was getting up at approximately 3:30 or 4 every morning, right? You can imagine how unsustainable that sort of thing is. She was also planning a wedding and all these sort of other things, and her boss had no idea because she wasn't going to complain about it, which is a great job. She didn't want to be that person, right? Under the direction of the woman who took over there, all the bosses had to have conversations about what could facilitate your work-life balance better. And when he found out that he had no idea she was commuting, he bumped the meeting back to 9. Life changed. That simply. And the vast majority of those sorts of things were that simple. Oh, I can change the meeting a little bit. Oh, I can let you come in late on Wednesdays because your kid has a counseling appointment every Wednesday morning, right? Or orthodontist in the afternoon. Okay, we get, right? Little things like that make huge differences in people's lives. And that's something that we can learn from Ernst & Young. But the gender component went through there too, because primarily it was young women who were scared to speak up because they wanted to be treated the same as everybody else, right? And so this sort of idea, the stereotype, and I noticed one of your upcoming talks is on negotiation, this idea, the stereotype that women don't ask, right? One of the reasons that women don't ask is we know there's backlash for asking, right? And when Ernst & Young took that away, right, specifically talked about it and took away that backlash, there were a lot of really mutually beneficial things that could happen. So, before we talk a little bit more about individual strategies, I want to break there and ask, do you guys have any questions you guys want to talk about? Like I said, I have created this presentation to be interactive. Like I have as many slides if you guys don't want to talk, or I don't, right? And so I front weighted this so we could talk about the concepts, and we can talk about your questions, your issues about the research if you'd like. But if questions kind of die out, then I'll move on. Sound good? All right. because from here on out, it's awesome, but also superfluous to what our conversation can be. Cool. Awesome. All right, and we have a mic, remember. Yes.
Hi, my name is Natalia. I'm from the MBA. I'm actually going into consulting.
Nice. So these were apropos, right?
So coming back to the Marissa Myers subject, I remember this very specifically because I was reading at the time Lean In. And there was a lot of PR things about how Sheryl Sandberg had not spoken up against or for Marissa Myers and what was she going to say about it. And she has a completely different approach to it. And I honestly feel like if the example does matter. If my boss leaves the office every day at 9, it sets an example, it sets a precedent, it sets what success looks like. So I'm curious to know how you defend that position of she's not setting an example, she does have the means to have a nursery next to her home. What does that mean for the younger executives at other tech companies when somebody can say, well, if Marissa Myers does it, you have no right to ask for something more?
That is a really awesome, great, and complicated question, which is why it's awesome and great. I think, when I talk about that, I think you're exactly right. One of the things in that Ernst & Young example that I gave that was most predictive what these things work was role modeling from bosses, right? If you say people can leave, you need to leave sometimes too. Because if they learn that you're here every day at 8 a.m., everybody, all the people under you are going to be here at 7:55, right? Because they're going to learn what it takes to get ahead. And you have to watch what you penalize and what you punish and what you reward. The Marissa Mayer issue is complicated to me, not because I don't think she's a role model. I absolutely do think she is, and I think what she role models is important. But I think that the decision that she made was a complicated one. Because, one thing, that layers of privilege tend to, obviously we can try to peel them back and try to see what happens, is that in that very specific context, her gender was glaringly obvious, right? And her pregnancy was obviously visibly, reminding people of her gender every single day and of the expectations regarding motherhood, which are diametrically opposed to being a harsh CEO, a strong, negotiating, take note, right? Which I think is funny being a mom, because if you've ever negotiated with a 5-year-old, seriously. But that's true. It's like moms are nurturing, they're caring, they're giving. You can't stand that for these sorts of things. And so she had that going in. And so she had to set an example. She also was given a company that was flailing. I mean, really, how many of you are like, yeah, but that's who I turn to for all my top news and technology needs, right? And so there were complicated things that she was given. And so you have all these complicated factors of saying you can expect and hold your female leaders to higher standards, which I think we should, right? But you can also understand that at the base level, you also just need them to succeed, right? So because that's an example, because the idea of if they fail, then it's just one more kind of notch in the well, we shouldn't have given her a chance anyway, because she couldn't do it. So I think for me it's very complicated, because I want her to act in that way. I absolutely do. But I also understand that she doesn't. That maybe she doesn't share the values that I share. That's absolutely possible, right? I mean, there are obviously a lot of diversity in the sort of values that people hold when they get to certain places. But it's also possible that she was like, you know what? I can do all this stuff and keep all these things in place, and our stock price falls and I'll be out by the end of the year, right? What do I do? And what example am I then setting, right? So it's very, very complicated. And I think, I love the gray areas and complexity. I think as researchers, or those of us who are researchers, I think it gives us really rich places to work. I think for those of you who are problem solvers, it should be really, really inspiring to say, here, these are really complex problems, right? What should she do in those situations? They're great case questions. Like, what would you do? What do you value? What do you reward? How do you put structures in place in organizations that take that out of her corner in the first place, right? And those are the sorts of things that I would say we highlight. Why is it that she was put under that microscope in such a different way? And can we start to work on those structures as opposed to her personal responsibility for those sort of things? I think, Sheryl Sandberg was in a very different culture and a very different environment, right? That gave her more leeway to act in those ways that were true to herself. And her partnering was very different, right? She talks about a whole lot her husband being this really co-partner and how much that allowed her to achieve. And so I think, there are lots of these complicating factors. But I think you should absolutely ask the questions, because you do want to hold people accountable to to changing those norms and those stereotypes, but you also have to understand that they're still operating under those norms and stereotypes. So I think that both things can happen at the same time, and we can strive to make things better, but also understand that you do need them to kind of win playing the game there is sometimes to be able to start changing it. That's a reality that may be distasteful in some ways, but it's absolutely a reality. It's kind of like the whole idea of in academia in general. Well, when people get tenure, then maybe they can change, but you have to play the game to get to the point of power to be able to do those sorts of things. Depending on the numbers, you have to be able to change it. That's a great question. Other questions?
Thank you for your presentation. I'm Yoshi. I'm also from IR school, so thank you for your presentation. And my question might be related to visual strategies more, but when you talking about penalties, there are industries like sectors exist like which penalize people who wouldn't work very long hours, like the law firm or, well, in my case, it's government. And if you don't have power to change the game rule itself, well, what you can do?
Yeah, another good and complicated question, right? The idea of what do you do, right? If you are in those norms, you don't have the power to change them, and you still want to live your life, right? And how do you manage those sorts of norms and expectations? I think, one of the things that's very, very important is, there are lots of things important, let me start with this one, is gaining people around you that you know are your peers that are understanding the same things. One of the things that tends to happen in those super competitive sorts of environments where people go into where there are only a few positions to get into and everybody knows that there are only a few, is that it tends to foster a whole lot of kind of really harsh competition. And it's particularly true amongst women. What we found is that there really is no such thing as this queen bee sort of thing, except for when you're in a very gendered, segregated, competitive workplace where there's only one or two positions for women and everybody knows it. And then you tend to get this sort of backstabbing stuff goes on because everybody knows, right? And one thing that we found is that if you can get people to kind of change that underlying culture into cooperation, into commiseration, those sort of things help. Organizations like this, right? The idea of, okay, let's bring people together. We can talk about these sort of things. It can help you to not feel like you're the only one dealing with it. And one of the main things that affects this idea of dissatisfaction with the way your work and family is dealing with is you feeling like you are doing something different than everybody else, right? Everybody else can have this probably issue. They're not telling you. They're not complaining. So they must have achieved something or figured it out better than you have, which is absolutely almost always not the case, right? Finding out that that's not the case and having someone to commiserate with is a very good step. The second step is, and in fact, let me check this next slide to see the degree to which I cover this because it might be very, very helpful. This is from a book that a couple friends of mine wrote, which I think is interesting, and I'll return to these. The other thing is trying to figure out what small victories you can make in the way in which you manage your own life. You may not be able to change your time allocation, but you may be able to change the way in which you emotionally react to that time allocation. So I was working on some research with students in social psychology about a year ago. We were working on some ideas of this idea of time pressure and feeling like you're time shortage, time scarcity, and how you can manipulate that feeling, right, of time scarcity. Because time is time, right? Like, it is what it is. But can you feel less guilty about the time you're using? Can you feel less stressed about the time you're using? So if you can try to, if you can't change structurally what's going on, can you change the way you feel about it? And that, as kind of tried as it sounds, there's a whole lot of really, it's really the foundation of like behavioral therapy. Like, as much to say it, right? Which is when these things happen, don't castigate yourself, don't make yourself feel guilty. And part of what we know guilt is this feeling that you have violated some expectation or norm. And if you've got people around you and realize those aren't the norms, that people aren't doing these things, you feel less guilty about it. Because you don't feel like you violated the norm. Everybody's living the same life that you're living. Another thing that can help is mentors. One thing that women don't do a very good job of is seeking mentors, lots of mentors, right? One mentor you don't have to just seek one mentor that can then be your solve all problems person. Get mentors in different areas that do different things well, right? Some people give you psychosocial support, some people are gonna sponsor you, right? And speak up, well, find out who those people are. And that can help because they can be your voice in the room when you don't have power, right? If they care about what your outcomes are, they can say, wait. If they know you and care about you and empathize with you, they might be able to come up with solutions based on structures you haven't even seen yet because you're not in that place of power yet. So finding good mentors, and a lot of them, is often something that you can do. Yeah, time is time. It's very hard to change the way businesses are organized. Families have changed a whole lot over the years. Work is much slower in the way that it's changed. Although technology is changing it now at a much more rapid pace, and companies are really trying to keep up. It'll be really interesting to see what firms do.
Questions?
I'm wondering if you thought. I'm wondering if you think at all about the cost of creativity that juggling family and work is, especially in academia where it's a creative field, and I feel like oftentimes what you don't have is downtime, and that seems to be really important to the creative process.
That's a great question. So, beyond just academia, pretty much every company you talk to, their keyword these days is innovation. How do we foster innovation? How do we innovate? How do we innovate? Innovation is the great. That's what everybody wants to figure out how to do. It's the keyword to everything. If this is a really great thing if you're in any interview, just talk about innovation and start listening. Here's how I believe I can help your company to innovate. They'll go, oh, innovation, yes. This is true. I mean, you'll see it on every HR list of everything they're trying to do. But you're right. What we know kind of stifles innovation is stress. And because stress eats into our cognitive capacity and our capacity for expansive thought and growth. Another thing that bites into that is, one of my graduate students is doing her dissertation on this actually, is whether telework doesn't improve, right? Whether that negatively affects innovation, right? Because you don't have people together. Because we know that this sort of conflict, task-related conflict, improves innovation. And what she's found is that you can schedule that in. So yeah, you can schedule, it doesn't have to be spontaneous, like meeting people in the hallway. You can schedule these meetings and they can be just as innovative through, I'm scheduled and blocked off time for innovation, and that absolutely can work. People come to think of that innovation must be spontaneous, and it's absolutely not true. You just need the time to think, right? Time to talk. And so one thing we found is scheduling can be very, very important. So the same way that we can talk about it in terms of groups. So if you have a lot of people who are virtual workers and they're working off site, schedule a time that's in face, that's not a hyper scheduled in the block of time, right? But that's a time for discussion, tasks, right, that sort of stuff. And you can do the same thing individually. That's one thing that I've found that I do is I use my Outlook calendar I block off everything, right? I block off, and I know how I work. I work in kind of these sine curves, right? And I schedule them that way. I have a half hour here, 45 minutes there, right? When I'm going to write, I'm going to draft, I'm going to talk. Or I know who what I like to call my muses are, that I know when I talk to this person, I'm super pumped and super excited. And I love my job after I talk to these people. And I know who they are. And sometimes I schedule a bit more like these little inoculation shots. These boosters, right, of who these people are. And there are certain conferences I go to that I allot myself that may not be the kind of premiere I'm going to go and present all my work, but they're the type of conferences that light me up. And those sort of things too. So find those things to schedule that you feel really, fires you up. I find, that everybody's different in what those things are. And maybe for some people, maybe talking to people. For some people, talking to people might exhaust you beyond belief. And that does not make you when people are motivated. And maybe the innovation that comes from reading certain books, right? You go out and instead of reading academic articles, right? You go out and you get yourself a popular press written book that is genuine, generally related to what you do, that fires you up. Like I remember I would do that. I would go to the sociology section. I'm, an organizational psychologist, I'd go to the sociology section and I'd pick some really interesting gender-related book that, you know, is, oh, this woman goes undercover and does all this other stuff. And I would go and read it. And it's really not closely related to my work, but it would fire me up methodologically and all these sort of things. And those are the sorts of things that I found fired me up. So add that sort of diversity and schedule it into your day. And, you know, based on what we're finding from my students' dissertation, that sort of scheduling can result in just as much innovation as the spontaneity of it. So I'll move on really quickly to a couple more things before we finish. So I recommend this book if work and family is something like that you already are feeling the strain of, or you anticipate at some point. Maybe you're like, well, I don't have kids yet, but I'd like to someday, maybe, if I could fit in my schedule, do that sort of thing. This sort of book is good. So Jeff Greenhouse and Gary Powell. Jeff Greenhouse is a professor at Drexel, and Gary Powell's at UConn. They're what I like to call kind of the founding fathers. They're founding mothers too. These are the two founding fathers of the field of work and family and management literature. And this is a really interesting and very accessible book. Like if you're not a social scientist, you can still totally understand and read this book, right? But it's based in really good research. And a couple of things that they suggest about managing these sorts of relationship-related issues and issues regarding work and family are to know thyself, which I love, because I'm not talking about know who you are as a person in this sort of philosophical way. Know what success in work and family means to you, right? Remember when I talked about at the very beginning that balance was idiosyncratic? Define that for you, right? For me, my mother stayed home with me. I could not stay home with my daughter. It's just not who I am. I just couldn't. I would be a really bad mom if I did that. And so I define success as being a mom in a very different way than my mother would define success as being a mom. But I know that about myself, and I've said that for myself. The other component here is if you do have a partner, know what he or she believes to be success in your relationship. Because if you're on completely different pages, right, if they expect you to be home every day for dinner and you're like, well, no, that's great. If you're on completely different pages, that's bad. And one thing, there's a book by Harley Hope Shield called The Second Shift, which is a really, really great book about work and family and gender role orientation, which is something that I'm interested in. And one thing in the foreword that she found when she was a professor is that she had all these graduate students who studied gender. Like, this is what they did. They studied gender and work and family. They're sociologists. And pretty much none of them talked to their upcoming spouses or partners about what they expected their work and family lives to be like. They don't work out. We love each other. Right? Come on. You guys are sociologists. You study this stuff. And you're not talking about it. Talk about these things. What do you expect? What do you expect your work and family life to look like? And what does a successful work and family life look like for you and for him or her? Because those might be very different. And those are conversations you could have before, way before you do any of those things. They're very important. Seek support, and this is similar to what I was saying to Yoshi, like find support at work, but also find support at home. You have a lot of different support networks that I turn to for different things. Identify what those things are, right? Like if I need to completely escape away from the craziness of academia, I have my people that know nothing about academia, will never ask me any questions about anything I'm working on because they don't understand it anyway. And sometimes that's wonderful, right? Then I have, the things I tell my husband, or things I tell my best friend and my mom. Like I have these really broad social support networks. Build that. Start building it now if you haven't already. If you have a partner and you're dealing with work-family issues, try to be collaborative and avoid traditional gender norms as much as possible. One thing that we have found is that gender is very, very performative. In fact, gender is really something that people do more than something people have. And this is particularly true when they're put into roles that are gendered, like husband, wife. Like, any sort of role that has gender norms associated with it, people tend to act what those things are, right? Particularly if you've never done it before. So, found research, for instance, you had cohabiting pairs, they lived together, and then they got married, and they started acting differently. Because boyfriend and girlfriend was very different than husband and wife. They knew what those roles were. They knew this is what a wife does, this is what a husband does, right? And if you had ambiguity, people fall back into the role clarity that they have regarding those roles, right? basic role theory. It's Zimbardo's prison study, if you guys ever remember Psych 101, that you guys may have took a long time ago if you're not psychologists now, right? This idea that, well, they'd never been prison guards before, but they had in their mind what it meant to be a prison guard, and they acted that way. Right? The same thing happens with gender. Avoid that if you can. Because it stifles creativity, you need to be able to solve problems. Because it makes you beholden to a role expectation that may not be what's best for you and your family. This is also true in roles like boss subordinate, which are also gendered, right? Because even if it's the woman who's the boss and the male who is the subordinate, that's also gendered, because what is a female boss? You ask, still 75% of people will say they don't want a female boss. That you ask them, still, okay. Definitely not, right? So think about what those things are. So knowing that gender is something that you do, try to work against it. Acknowledge that. And even me, who studies this stuff for a living, God help my poor husband, I fall into these all the time, where I start to enact these things that I'm like, this is what I should do, and he'll go, because now he's lived with me, 15 years, so long enough to be able to be like, Beth, you're doing it again, right? He'll notice that, and he'll say, you don't have to do all this stuff for me. I'm cool. Okay, fine. But those are the sorts of things, having those conversations about what those expectations are is really, really helpful. And it takes stress off of trying to enact these roles of what does it mean to have a perfect family, a perfect work life. Because often, again, in society, we pitch those things as diametrically opposed, and they don't have to be that way, right? And a lot of that is managing our own expectations and supporting our own. So I think we're close to out of time, so I think I can take a couple more questions here before the end, if there are any. I'm glad to see I've solved all your life's problems. No question. Good. Awesome.
Well, if there are